I never imagined that my life could be reduced to 2 suitcases and a closed door. The divorce papers were still fresh when my husband told me I had 1 hour to leave. His voice was calm, almost polite, as if he were asking me to move my car, not abandon a life we had built together for 12 years. I stood in the living room, surrounded by furniture I had chosen, walls I had painted, and memories I had carried, and suddenly none of it belonged to me anymore. If this story touched your heart, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more new stories. I asked him one simple question. What about the money? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at his phone, then at the clock, and finally said, "You'll figure it out." That was it. No explanation. No support. Not even anger. Just dismissal. By sunset, I was standing on the sidewalk with my suitcases, watching the house lights turn on without me inside. I didn't cry then. Shock has a way of freezing tears before they fall. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to go. I spent that night in my car, parked near a quiet grocery store. The air was cold, and every sound felt louder than it should have been. I checked my bank account again and again, hoping I had missed something. But the numbers didn't change. 0. I had trusted him. Trusted the shared accounts. Trusted the promises. And now I understood how carefully everything had been emptied long before I ever saw it coming. By morning, I was exhausted, hungry, and terrified of what came next. That's when I remembered my father. My father had passed away years earlier. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was careful, thoughtful, and private. Before he died, he gave me a small envelope. Inside was an old bank card, worn at the edges, with the name of a bank I barely recognized. "Keep this," he had said. "You may never need it. But if life ever corners you, don't ignore it." At the time, I had smiled and thanked him, assuming it was sentimental more than practical. I placed it in a drawer and forgot about it. Until that morning, I drove to the address printed on the card. The building looked ordinary. Not impressive. Not old. Just a clean, quiet bank on a corner street. I almost turned around twice, convinced this was a mistake. Inside, the bank was calm. Soft lighting. A few customers. The kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. I approached the counter and handed the card to the banker, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a practiced smile. "I'm not sure if this still works," I said honestly. "It belonged to my father." He nodded and slid the card into his system. At first, nothing changed. Then his smile disappeared. He stared at the screen. His posture shifted. His fingers stopped moving. I noticed his face slowly lose color. "Is something wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer. He stood up so quickly that his chair rolled backward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, almost urgently, "one moment, please." He walked away from the counter, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. Other customers glanced at me, curious. I suddenly felt exposed, like I had done something wrong. Minutes passed. Each second stretched longer than the last. When he returned, he wasn't alone. A woman in a dark blazer walked beside him. She looked serious, professional, and alert. They whispered to each other before turning to me. "Ma'am," she said, "could you please come with us to a private office?" My stomach tightened. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head. Had the card been frozen? Was there a problem? Was I about to be embarrassed again? I followed them down a quiet hallway into a small office. The door closed behind us. The banker cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "can you confirm your full name?" I did. He typed again. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Then he looked at me and said something that made my chest tighten. "Your father was very careful." I didn't understand what that meant. The woman in the blazer leaned forward. "Your father opened this account over 20 years ago," she said. "It was set up with strict privacy instructions." She paused, watching my reaction. "It was also protected in ways we don't see very often." I swallowed. "Protected how?" The banker exchanged a glance with her. "That account was never linked to any other institution," he said. "No shared access. No digital footprint. No alerts." I felt dizzy. "I don't understand." He turned the screen slightly toward me. And that's when I saw the numbers. At first, my mind rejected what my eyes were seeing. I assumed it was a formatting error, a placeholder, something unreal. I leaned closer. The numbers didn't move. The banker spoke again, slowly and carefully. "Ma'am, this account is very much active." My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. "How much?" I asked, barely able to speak. The room went quiet. The woman answered instead. "Enough to change your life." I sat back in the chair, unable to process what was happening. Just hours earlier, I had been counting coins for gas. Now I was being told that my father had quietly built something I never knew existed. Tears finally came then. Not loud, not dramatic. Just silent drops that fell without permission. My father had seen something I hadn't. He had prepared for a moment I never believed would come. The banker slid a box of tissues across the desk. "We can help you set up access," he said gently. "But first, there are documents you need to review." I nodded, still in shock. As he placed the papers in front of me, one thought echoed clearly in my mind. My life was not over. It was just beginning again. I signed the documents with hands that were still shaking. Each page felt heavier than the last, not because of the words written on them, but because of what they represented. Proof. Security. A future I thought had been stolen from me forever. The banker explained everything slowly. How the account had been structured. How my father had placed layers of protection around it. How no one, not even a spouse, could ever trace or touch it without my direct presence. He planned this carefully, the banker said. He wanted to make sure this was yours alone. I nodded, unable to speak. My father had always been quiet about his sacrifices. Now I understood why. When I walked out of the bank that day, the sun felt different. Brighter. Warmer. As if the world itself had shifted just enough to remind me that endings are not always permanent. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I could go anywhere now. But freedom can be overwhelming when you've lived without it for too long. I didn't rush. I booked a modest hotel room for the night. Nothing fancy. Just a clean bed, a shower, and silence. For the first time in days, I slept without fear. The next morning, reality began to settle in. Money doesn't erase pain. It doesn't undo betrayal. But it gives you something priceless after loss: choices. I spent the morning making calls. A lawyer. A financial advisor. A private meeting with the bank to finalize access and transfers. Every conversation confirmed the same thing. Everything was legal. Everything was protected. Everything was mine. And none of it could be taken away. By the third day, I found myself standing outside my old house. I hadn't planned to come. My car just turned that way on its own. The driveway was empty. The curtains were open. Life inside continued, as if I had never existed there. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I just stood there long enough to feel something unexpected. Nothing. No anger. No sadness. No regret. I realized then that closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from clarity. Later that week, my phone rang. It was my ex-husband. I watched the screen light up with his name, my finger hovering above the answer button. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to hear his voice, not for him, but for myself. I answered. "Where have you been?" he asked. No greeting. No concern. "I've been handling my life," I said calmly. There was a pause. The bank called me. My heart stayed steady. They shouldn't have. They said I'm no longer authorized on anything connected to you, he snapped. That's correct. Another pause. Longer this time. "What did you do?" he asked. I smiled for the first time during that call. I remembered who I was. He tried to threaten me. Then he tried to guilt me. When neither worked, he tried kindness. Apologies followed, clumsy and hollow. I listened quietly. When he finished, I said one sentence. "This conversation is over." And it was. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt carefully. Not recklessly. Not emotionally. I bought a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I furnished it slowly, choosing pieces that felt like me, not like a shared past. I enrolled in classes I had postponed for years. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from while trying to hold a marriage together by myself. Every step felt intentional. Every choice felt earned. One evening, while unpacking the last box, I found something unexpected. Another envelope. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting. I sat on the floor and opened it. If you are reading this, it means life tested you harder than it should have. I wish I could be there to protect you, but this was the only way I knew how. Money fades. Strength doesn't. Use this not to escape life, but to live it on your terms. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. Months passed. I stopped counting time by loss and started measuring it by peace. One afternoon, I received a message from the bank. A routine update. Nothing urgent. Nothing dramatic. But it reminded me of that first moment. The pale face. The quiet room. The truth revealed at exactly the right time. If my father hadn't planned ahead, I don't know where I would have been. But he had. And because of that, I was no longer surviving. I was building. Building a life sounds simple until you actually begin. At first, it was quiet work. Mornings with no urgency. Evenings without tension. I learned how to sit with myself again, without explaining, without defending, without waiting for approval. The silence that once scared me slowly became my greatest comfort. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping women who were navigating divorce, job loss, and sudden independence. I never told them my story all at once. I shared only what was necessary. Sometimes hope works best when it's subtle. They saw me as calm, grounded, strong. They didn't know how close I had come to losing everything. One afternoon, months later, I received an email from my lawyer. The divorce settlement was finalized. My ex-husband had fought harder than I expected. Not because he needed the money, but because he couldn't stand the idea that I didn't need him anymore. In the end, the court saw through the tactics. The outcome was fair, clean, final. I read the email once. Then I deleted it. That chapter no longer deserved space in my mind. Not long after that, something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a small financial literacy workshop. The organizer had heard me talk at the community center and asked if I would share my experience. Not details. Not numbers. Just perspective. I almost said no. Then I remembered my father's letter. Use this not to escape life, but to live it on your terms. So I said yes. Standing in front of that room, I felt nervous for the first time in a long while. The faces looking back at me were familiar in a way that mattered. People who had trusted others too much. People who had lost stability overnight. People who were afraid of starting over. I told them one truth. Security isn't about how much you have, I said. It's about knowing you'll be okay even if everything changes. The room was quiet. Not because they were impressed. Because they understood. That night, I went home and sat by the window, watching the city lights glow. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the future without limits shaped by fear. I wasn't defined by what I lost. I was defined by what I protected. My values. My independence. My voice. A year passed. Life continued in steady, meaningful ways. I traveled. I invested wisely. I laughed more than I ever had before. I learned that happiness doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in when you finally stop running from yourself. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I visited his grave. I placed the letter beside the stone and spoke softly, even though no one else was there. You were right, I said. About everything. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time since he was gone, I felt complete. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. A routine annual summary. I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. That account was never really about money. It was about foresight. About love that plans ahead. About someone believing in you even when you don't believe in yourself yet. I thought back to that moment in the bank. The pale face. The sudden silence. The shock. At the time, it felt like fate stepping in at the last possible second. Now I understand something deeper. It wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting the moment. My story didn't end when I was locked out of my life. It began when I walked into that bank with nothing but a worn card and a fragile hope. And I walked out with something far more valuable than money. I walked out with myself.